So today, what I'm going to try to explain is hierarchy. The long-awaited video on hierarchy is here. There's a lot of aspects to this, and this is going to get very busy, so stay until the end. Now, a lot of people will say the word hierarchy, but they will not explain what it means, probably because they can't. This is not easy. I have been working on it for a couple of years on the best way to explain this to people so that they understand. The issue is that hierarchy is everywhere. Hierarchy is older than trees, as Jordan Peterson has said. And so, because it's so pervasive and so much bigger than we are, and it's part of everything we do all the time, it's very hard to nail down an easy explanation for it. And so, unfortunately, I can't promise you an easy explanation, but I can promise you an attempt at getting you to understand, we'll say, the scope and scale of how hierarchy impacts everything in the world. So when we're talking about hierarchy, we're not talking about a mere system or procedure or set of things that operates at different levels with something in top and things at the bottom. Okay, that's not what we're talking about. That is one way to see the results of hierarchy, but that is not what hierarchy is and how it works and what's done. The thing that we're referring to with hierarchy is actually a side effect of participation of multiple people. So the way this works is the following. When you are in a corporation, a business, even a small business, right? Say a 10-person business, different specialties have to be applied in order for that business to operate. Now, there's a book called The 10-Day MBA. I've talked about it before by Steven Silberger. Excellent book. Everybody should read it. It'll make you a better employee. There, it's implied, there's 10 basic sets of skills required to run a business. There's probably more like 12 or 14, but be that as it may, you probably can't become proficient enough in all 10 of those things to run a business by yourself for different reasons. One is it's hard to be proficient in 10 things for anyone. But the more important reason is, even though those 10 things aren't, we'll say, full-time jobs, they have overlapping time frames. And so sometimes you need to be watching what's going on with your employees, management, while the accounting also needs to get done for a deadline, right? And so one person can't do both at the same time. And so businesses aren't just all about skills. It's not apply skill, apply expertise, get result. That's not the world. That can happen within a structure. That structure is above you. Therefore, it's part of the hierarchy. And therefore, in relation to it, you are also part of the hierarchy. So because one person can't effectively, for the most part, and there might be exceptions, but they're very rare exceptions to this, can't run a business at a certain scale by themselves, and they need other people. Those other people are going to be able to, and probably necessarily will have to, not be busy all the time at the thing they've been hired for. Now, this works to the advantage of small businesses and to the disadvantage of large businesses. In a small business, everybody wears many hats. And the disadvantage to that is you need people who can wear many hats. That's not everyone in the population, right? How many people it is, I don't know. I don't care. It's not everyone. And it doesn't seem to be a large number either. Can't tell, but it certainly looks that way to me. Now, a big business has way more money, so they can afford to hire people that have one specialty and only do that one thing and never operate outside of the bounds of that, whether it's HR or it's accounting or it's engineering of some kind or it's sales, right? So your position in the hierarchy of something larger is different than your position in the hierarchy of something smaller. That's just one small example. And now I want to switch gears a bit and try to explain something else that hopefully you'll start to get the pattern. And these things won't seem connected. And so when you find the connection, you will find hierarchy. Now, I grew up in the city of Lowell, Massachusetts. Lowell, Massachusetts, because I grew up there, is obviously the greatest city of all time. And that's only a slight brag because Lowell changed the world in very significant ways. It's the home of the so-called Second Industrial Revolution and the textile manufacturing revolution in the United States. It's had a significant impact worldwide. How did this come to be? Well, Lowell is a planned city. And it's a planned city because a bunch of people who were very high up in the hierarchy, it's Massachusetts, and we have the Mayflower descendants and things like that. So all the old money was there, right? The original money that founded the initial set of colonies was in New England. So New England has this driving force of momentum, which I've talked about elsewhere. Momentum, see that video. That's going to be important to hierarchy, by the way. And these people are getting a different sets of skills together to copy the British Industrial Revolution. So the Brits already have the Industrial Revolution, right? They're smack dab in the middle of it, and polluting their cities and destroying their society left, right, and center. Folks like Dickens wrote about this. Unfortunately, in the US, we took it very, very seriously and started reforms before there were problems. Interesting approach, but for the most part, worked pretty well. How do we get the information? Because trade secrets are still sort of a thing back in the 1800s to replicate what England has. Well, there's a group of investors, and one of them has an eidetic memory. His last name is Lowell, by the way. So the investors send him over to England, and he tours the wonderful factories, which the English are glad to show off their wonderful factories. And he's not allowed to take any note-taking materials with him, which for him is not a problem because he goes back to his hotel room and writes it all down when he gets there because he remembers everything. Now, he takes this information, we basically just stole the information, right? And he comes back, and with his group of investors, he has all these sketches. They work with a master machinist. And that master machinist is able to work with these guys, look at these drawings, improve upon them. Very important, actually. We actually improve upon all the British gearing and mechanisms and pretty much everything we find an improvement for, which is much easier to do than creating things from scratch, by the way. So you've got this master mechanic, you've got this, moderate-sized investor called Lowell, right? And at least two other guys, right? And they're the ones that are driving this whole project. They first set up in Waltham, Mass, a small mill. It's ridiculously successful. They decide to move to Lowell. Now, the reason why they decide to move to Lowell, I don't think is well documented. The folks down at the Middlesex Canal Museum, where my uncle volunteered for a while, one of them believes that the reason that they moved to this area, which wasn't called Lowell at the time, is because the Middlesex Canal is there, and canal transportation is very, very cheap compared to ground transportation. And they were already moving logs down from the Merrimack River. They cut them in New Hampshire and Maine, they'd throw them on the river, and they'd come down to the coast and get processed and shipped out. So there's falls over there at the Merrimack River in what's now Lowell. And so there's a canal that bypasses that and takes the logs, down to Boston, basically. So there's quick and easy shipping. They move there. They buy up all this farmland and plan a city, and they mapped it out. And they dug all these canals to run the machinery and built the first textile city in the United States. So they only had one mill in Waltham along the Charles River. They build this much larger mill along a much stronger river with better water flow, by the way, and also canal access. And they build all these canals to move things around, but more importantly, to run the mills. Right, everything's run on water power. Now, you can't do that without forming a hierarchy. You have to have a hierarchy of investment. You have to have a hierarchy of skills. And all of that has to be managed. There's no way around those three things. You're not getting around them. And so hierarchy isn't just this flat little triangular thing. It's all tied up in organization and structure. And when we say hierarchy, we flatten it and we think about it in terms of, oh, this is up here, and then there's things below that, and things below that, and things below that. But that's actually not what's happening. That's an important thing to understand, is that some things are above others, and the things that are above, there tend to be fewer of them, right? You only need one guy with an eidetic memory. Having an eidetic memory is extremely rare, by the way. Right? So it's a super valuable skill. Also, he had money, right? But he wasn't the wealthiest of the group, for example. So you need people with much more money, because building factories is expensive. And if you don't already have money, it's not like you're going to build one from scratch by yourself, right? That's not going to happen. So in order to do these things that are, let's say, bigger than you need participation. You need cooperation. You need help. The formation of that help is a hierarchy. Whenever you have a group of people, of animals, of objects, there is a hierarchy. Now, hierarchies can be flexible, so things can move around. This happens all the way down to the family. Now, families are small, hierarchies are clear, and they make sense, or can be made sense of in a way. But if you look closely at what actually happens in families, and people talk like this sometimes. Oh, your father's not home. You have to be the man of the house. How interesting. Now, as a small child, can you take the place of your father? Not in all aspects, but maybe in some. Right? So hierarchies tend to be relatively flexible. An inflexible hierarchy is what people sense sometimes, usually incorrectly, by the way, and call it tyranny. But they're just abusing both concepts. So when we think about hierarchy, what we're referring to is the thing that solves domicide. See my video on domicide. It's the thing that actually resolves that problem of domicide. You have a place amongst a number of things that gives you leverage to participate in something bigger than you. So it's right to say the hierarchy is bigger than you, because it's the thing that can do something bigger than you, right? You can't go on family vacation alone. You can't build a mill by yourself. No one can do that. All right, just too big. Requires too many different skills and too much time. Like, a lot of people don't account for time. So sure, you might be able to write a very large, complicated piece of software by yourself, given enough time. The problem is, especially now, if you started now, by the time you finished, your software would be obsolete because tech is moving too fast. So time is a factor. So in order to do that quickly, you need dedicated specialists working on their piece and only their piece, and not having to worry about all the pieces that aren't theirs. It's very hard to get work done if you're worried about whether or not you're going to get a paycheck. But if other people are taking care of making sure you get a paycheck, and sometimes they screw up and sometimes things happen anyway, but most of the time that's not true. So if you're worried about that, you can't focus on your specialty, whether it's accounting or programming or some kind of mechanical engineering or even just management. Managers who are focused on their paychecks or worried about their paychecks don't manage well. I've met them. They don't manage well. You don't want them as managers. So the hierarchy resolves all this for you rather nicely, I might add. And that's important that it's actually resolved. Understanding this is important. It's really hard to understand, we'll say, the significance of this. Now, the problem is that because the hierarchy is bigger than us, we don't see it clearly. It's just more than us, right? Like vastly more than us. So it manifests itself in different ways. Let's suppose you are working with somebody and they go woke, right? As they say, and then of course they go broke, so they lose their job. And they were a peer of yours and you were friends, and the damage is mostly to them because they're fairly low down. They're just a peer of yours, a worker like you, and they're immediate friends maybe. Some of the damage is to you. You lost a friend. They went woke, right? That happened. You only know them because of work or whatever, right? You may get in touch with them outside of work, right? But it's a limited damage. Now, if the director of HR goes woke, because of where they are in the hierarchy, they're much less likely to get fired because there's fewer directors of HR than there are, we'll say, normal everyday workers. And so the hierarchy, however they got there, is not relevant to this particular discussion because hierarchy is so misunderstood. We're not placing people well in it. And that's what's causing things to blow up. So the director of HR goes woke, and there's an impact to a bunch of people, and people are not getting fired necessarily. Or at least the person who's the woke one and needs to go broke is not the one that's on the chopping block first, we'll say. Because being a director has a certain amount of implied momentum, and directors are harder to find, hence why there are fewer of them. Also, you need fewer of them. Kind of handy. So that can affect a bunch of people in a company. Whereas standard worker bee, just get another one. It's easier. I mean, it technically is. And this is where everybody gets wrapped up. They want everything to be equal, and they believe Karl Marx in that there's no difference between a factory worker, a factory manager, and a factory owner, which is just categorically false. It couldn't be less true. And hierarchy is the thing that allows us not only to cooperate and participate together and to do things that are bigger than us, but allows us to resolve what would otherwise be a conflict. And that thing is called inequality. So you are not going to be equal to me in programming skill. You might be better, you might be worse, but we're not going to be equal. You're not going to be equal to me in YouTube channel. You might have a bigger channel, you might have a smaller channel, but we're not going to be equal. You're not going to be equal to me in sailing skill or driving skill or ability to fix car. We're just not going to be equal. So how do we deal? Hierarchy is how we deal with that. Because if the goal is to be equal, what you will get is a flat world and conflict. Because you'll be on a level playing field, on a plane. This level playing field is the worst idea I've ever heard. And it's so obviously horrible that it's terrifying to me when people talk about this. If everybody is squished down flat onto a level playing field, then they are in conflict all the time about everything. That's the problem. Look around. Do you see that anywhere? That's what it's the result of. Trying to be on a level playing field. We're not equal. We don't need to be on a level playing field. I don't want to make electric cars. I don't want to go to Mars. I'm not interested in boring tunnels under the earth for transportation. I already know why that doesn't work. Uh, why all three of those things don't work, or aren't sustainable long term or something. That's okay. And it's okay to have someone doing that. That's okay too. But I don't want to be involved in any of those projects. In a level playing field with equal access, I should be involved in all of those projects because there isn't actually another option. The other option is called hierarchy. And the deeper the hierarchy, the more options you have in terms of what you can do. And now you can object and say, but Mark, there's all these hierarchies everywhere. It's like, well, I mean, that is a way to think about it. But again, you're seeing a small slice of hierarchy. And you're a limited creature in hierarchies, by definition, bigger than you. And so what you're seeing could be the result of a hierarchy, but it is not the entire hierarchy. That's actually really important, because if you're looking at something that's bigger than you and you're having a negative affect about it, or a negative idea because it feels like it shouldn't be there because you're supposed to have a level playing field, then what's going to happen is you're only going to sense negative results of something that doesn't only have negative results. And because everything is a trade-off, which of course I have a video about, what you're not able to do is judge good from bad. Are the negative effects worse than the sum total of the positive effects? And maybe you can't see that. For example, again, if you have a negative affect, if you're depressed, what is depression? It's just seeing the negative side of everything at some level. It's way more than that, but also seeing the negative side of everything. The whole world looks awful. Doesn't seem worth it. Maybe to have been born. If your depression's severe enough, and my depression's been that severe, and I know people who've had depression that severe, this is no joke, pretty serious. But that's not a lasting, true statement about the world. Being is good, being born is wonderful. I have a pond, dragonflies. I go outside. I'm just reminded, flowers, right? It's all here. So, wow, it's great. Very handy. When you're looking at your business that you're an employee of, and they're just pushing you to get work done, and maybe they should, because maybe you're lazy, or you're not normally lazy, but this month you are for reasons you don't understand or can't comprehend, because that happens to all of us. You're like, oh, this is horrible. My boss is, riding me and pushing me to do things, and unbeknownst to you, you're actually not feeling well. You're just not aware because you're not paying good attention to yourself. Jordan Peterson, treat yourself as you would treat somebody in need of help, right? That sort of thing. We don't do that, so we don't always know how good we're feeling. So our boss, riding us might be us. It might be them, right? But it might be us. So you see it as a negative. And the corporation's going down the tubes because the product hasn't shipped, and you thought you did your part well, and this other person didn't do their part well, right? Or these other people, worse yet. You can always fall into that spiral. But without all of those other pieces, nothing happens. Nothing at all happens, right? In the meantime, hopefully, again, you're getting paid anyway. So the company doesn't ship product and eventually goes out of business. At least something happened in the middle, which is kind of handy, because you got to eat, and getting paid for somebody else taking a risk, because it's their money, not yours. You just lose income. They lose investment, previous income that they had saved up. Right. This is why the hierarchy is important. Someone's got to save up the money to pay your stupid salary. Right. In all cases, it's not magic. Investment isn't magic. Investment happens from people who have stored value, who are now taking a risk with that stored value by sharing it with other people in a hierarchy, right, to make something happen. Because hierarchy is how you make big things happen. Right? And so this is how I want you to think about it. Hierarchy is how you make big things happen. Right? How you move large groups of people, how you operate at scale. Now, this is a tricky part is scale. And hierarchy is all wrapped up in scale. As you get larger scale, and there are scaling points, they're very hard to point out. I'm probably never going to do a video on scale because this is too hard. I might figure out a way to do it, but we'll see. As things scale up, so from family to community, right? Or from person to family to community to county to state to federal in the United States, right? Structures, hierarchies have to change, right? And so let's suppose you're part of a small business and they get lots of funding. The structure of the organization to maintain a working hierarchy has to change. Why? Because the addition of the money means typically you're going to hire more people, and the more people you hire at the bottom of an organization, the more middle people you need to manage that and coordinate the efforts at the bottom. And the more people you have in an organization, the more structure you need. And there's different structures that can work. I once worked for a tech company that wrote software whose primary pull on the budget came from the chief financial officer's office. And I thought that was very, very strange because every other tech company, it was the chief technical officer who got to determine the budget, not the finance guys. This resulted in something very strange, by the way, because this is a bit of a broken hierarchy. That company almost went out of business shortly thereafter, by the way, because one day they were asking us what we needed, and we said, well, we need something to back up the software, the product that we produce. Since you can just copy the stupid things, all you need is very expensive disk and lots of it, which, it was pretty expensive, not relative to the income of the company, but is a major capital expenditure. And the CFO's office said, no, we don't need that. And we all went, well, I don't know, man. If something happens and we lose the software, you're going to change your mind really fast because you're going to be out of business pretty much overnight, right? And so sometimes hierarchies aren't set up well for where they're at, right? And hopefully you somewhat understood already that, especially in large, this is a Fortune 500 company, especially in large companies, not all the hierarchies are the same at all. Sometimes the CFO office runs the budget, and sometimes the CTO office runs the budget. Now, the finance guys run the budget, right? But who determines what the budget gets spent on? Well, hopefully it's not the bean counters, as they're called. In some industries, it should be. Banking, the bean counter should run the company. That is true. Software, the bean counter should not run the company, right? So different hierarchies for different needs and different hierarchies for different sizes, different scales. So in a small business, you hire more people, you're operating at a different scale, hopefully because you have more customers or you hope to grow into more customers. You have to transform the company. You have to change things about the company, maybe change the structure of the reporting in the company. That happened to me at that same company I mentioned before, where they bought another company, they merged the management teams, why I will never to this day understand. Stupid mistake, and bankrupted the company pretty much. They're still around, they survived. But when they did that, my position relative to in this case, I think he was the vice president of software or something, changed, right? I got further away from him. And I said, well, this isn't much of a career path. These guys who got here actually yesterday, as in they weren't here, and then they came yesterday, and now they all have titles above mine. I'm out of here, right? I'm going back to consulting. And consulting is a nice way to jump the hierarchy because in consulting, you can consult first, the C-suite. So you can be talking to all the execs in a company. I've done that many, many times. And boy, things look different from up there. And this is the problem with hierarchy, because people have different specialties. This guy Lowell goes to the mills. He's not a machinist. They have no fear of him, right? Anybody else goes to the mills in England, they don't have an eidetic memory. They come back with nothing. He comes back with full notes. People are different. How do we leverage that difference to make the world a better place? The answer to that is hierarchy. Hierarchy is the thing that facilitates the cooperation. So the master machinist, who otherwise is sitting back in Massachusetts somewhere and building the same old stuff, because we don't have, occasionally inventing something new for one of the farmers. We don't have an industry. Everybody's a farmer. Everybody. So this guy with this eidetic memory, these guys with a bunch of money, because it costs a bunch of money to do this like you have to have the funding typically secured up front to do a project like this, which is physical building and construction of unknown products, unknown things involved. So you need the money. That has to pre-exist, basically. It has to be pledged or promised. Then they need to develop a plan, and there's at least 3 of them involved in this project initially. Lowell's just one of them, and he's a minor investor. But I forget, he might be the one that knows the machinist. You have to be able to recognize talent. Oh, this guy knows how to build stuff, right? He's a good blacksmith. He knows what he's doing. Okay, well, we know somebody who knows what they're doing. We have the money. We got to put it to something. We're not going to sit on the money, right? This is why I don't like people who don't like wealth. Wealth can be good or bad. And a lot of people will not sit on their wealth. They will invest it in making the world different. Whether or not that's a good thing is a different discussion, right? But you can't assume it's a bad thing, right? Because everything we have is built on wealth. So it must be good because some of the things we have are good, right? And then you've got this guy with this eidetic memory. So now we have a way to go to England, steal the stuff, and replicate it here. Without all of those skills, we don't have that way. How do we get all of those skills together? Well, you have to form a hierarchy. Someone has to be in charge. And different people have to be in charge of different aspects of the project. There's no way around that. So Karl Marx is wrong. It's that simple. People will not, quote, self-organize and do these things. How do I know? Because they don't. It's not that. Look around. When does that happen? Never. Oh, okay. That's probably because people can't do it or don't do it. A little bit of both, by the way. Some people that can, don't, right? Most people absolutely can't. And that's okay. That's what hierarchy is for, to fix the unequal problem. How do we participate in a cooperative fashion to get something done that is so much larger than we are? The way we perceive that is called hierarchy. That's only one way we perceive it. That's only one of the terms we use for this process of coming together. Some might call that communion towards something outside of ourselves. And it's not autopoiesis. That's ridiculous. It's hierarchy. It's more than just hierarchy, but a lot of it is just expressed with the word hierarchy. So, I've given you a bunch of different examples, right? The family example is probably the easiest to understand initially. The sort of very brief, very large stroke example of Lowell. And that's another example. These examples within a company and going woke, that's another example. You just have to think about, I'll just give you the hierarchy for Lowell, right? What it turned into. Because you'll also notice there's a time component, right? Lowell starts out as a single mill in Waltham as the result of this project of going off to England right? Deciding to do this, sending the right guy off, coming back, working with the machinist, right? And then a bunch of other workers to build a factory along the Charles River. And then, oh, wow, let's spend the rest of our money, right? We're all in. We'll build this planned city in the middle of farmland and create the second industrial revolution, the greatest industrial revolution in the history of the earth, by the way. I think that's a fair enough argument. Let's do it, right? So you can see that. So what does it become? Well, it becomes initially the mill girls. So all these girls on farms. You don't want girls farming anyway, right? There's only so many farms. Well, let's give them jobs. Very moral, by the way, very moral in the beginning. The first set of owners, very moral way of dealing with the mill girls. It's fascinating. If you ever go to Lowell, check it out. It's interesting history there. You've got the mill girls at the bottom. You've got the people running the mill girl boarding house, right? Because they had to go to the city to work. So they needed a place to stay. So they had their own boarding houses. And then there's managers above them, managing the factory and paying attention to how things are working, not each individual loom and whether or not the parts of the machine, any particular machine, are running smoothly, right? They're concerned with what's the total output. Is there a stoppage here that should cause a stoppage there, right? And then there's the guys above that managing, well, we need this much production in order to ship this in this kind of time frame. Right? You don't want the guys worrying about the details of the factory, worrying about that, right? You certainly don't want them worrying about each individual part and whether or not it breaks. And when something breaks, somebody has to report it. They have to allocate the resource for somebody to go fix that. And then they have to continue to pay attention to that other thing now. They have to go back to that. That's why specialties are important, right? And so everybody plays their role, their part in the hierarchy. And that includes you. And the hierarchy is wrapped up in momentum. What is momentum? If you were born into a wealthy family, you have a great deal of momentum. You can move or change or redirect that momentum towards a big project of industrializing the United States. Now, maybe you don't have so much wealth that you can do it alone, but if you form a hierarchy, a partnership, and cooperate with a couple of other people, maybe the three of you combined have enough money to make it happen. And now all you need to do is find the right skill set. Oh, well, one of you already has one of the skills we're going to need, which is an eidetic memory. Fantastic. Oh, and we just need to find a good machinist. And then we need to hire workers to build a mill, right? And the machinist has to work kind of 24/7. That only happens through hierarchy. It doesn't happen, and it can't happen any other way. So once you understand all of that, right, you get an idea for how important this is. If you were born into wealth, you're not going to catch up to the people who were born into wealth. That's not how it works, because that momentum happened through generations, through time. When you add time to hierarchy, strange things happen. When you add time to anything, strange things happen. Time is wrapped up in momentum as well. And that's why hierarchies can corrupt. Hierarchies don't change as conditions change. And not all conditions that change need the hierarchy to change. And some hierarchies need to stay there irrespective of change. It's a very difficult thing. These are not easy concepts. I don't expect people to understand them. I'm not claiming that I understand them all that well either. I just have better explanations than everybody else. Mostly because I use simpler language and simpler conceptions, simpler patterns. Beware of people using complicated patterns. They're just going to overload you. The complicated patterns are not useful. So when we think about hierarchy through time, we have to consider scale. We have to consider whether or not change is good, because change is not always good. This company that I mentioned earlier that I worked for, they decided to buy the company that their founder had left, right? So the guy was at this one company, he left it to do the same thing in a different way, right? From a math engineering perspective. Oh, if you write the software this way, it's better. maybe. They're certainly more successful. The first company went out of business, right? So they changed their management structure, and that was a bad idea. They should have kept it the same. They were already the market leader. There was no reason for them to change anything. But they bought the company, hired all the people that bankrupted the last one to run theirs effectively, kept all the other people, pissed them off, obviously, and subsequently, really hurt their business for years and years, actually. Years. Like 5-10 years later, they were still trying to clean up the mess from buying that company. Some hierarchy shouldn't change. It's not like they were gaining that many more customers or required that much more, and all the things they might have required were at the bottom, not the top. They were a well-managed company. In a well-managed company, you don't want to change the management, obviously, right? Determining these things is hard, which is why people don't like hierarchy, because they see a bad implementation of hierarchy, or an unchanging hierarchy when it should change, or a hierarchy that shouldn't change changing as a function of the hierarchy. Unfortunately, hierarchies don't do anything. People do things. Agents are people primarily. That's what's going on. So don't blame the hierarchy. It's a very abstract concept when you do that, and it's not helpful. It's not helpful at all. And a lot of what determines where you are in a hierarchy is the momentum from the past, where and how you were born. And yeah, you had no, quote, choice about that. Sure, who cares? Everybody else didn't have any choice about that too, by the way. So you can look at other people as having a better draw in the lottery of that. And they were born to wealthy parents. Wealthy kids tend to struggle, and they tend to commit suicide. So the ones that survive, which is survivorship bias, you may think of as lucky. And they may not be as lucky as you think. They may struggle with things that you can't conceive of how to struggle with. So don't be resentful about hierarchy. Recognize that hierarchy solves inequality. It solves the domicide, and that it's so big that you don't actually understand all the aspects of it. And that because we live in an imperfect world and we're imperfect people, at least I have that on pretty good authority, like my own observation of actually everything, we need to be able to do things. How it looks when people cooperate by participating together, we tend to call hierarchy. It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all. And hierarchy is everywhere. I don't do this YouTube channel alone. I have an editor. I have an artist helping me. I've actually a few artists helping me. Everything we do is wrapped up in some kind of hierarchy that we are embedded in, or that we voluntarily participate with, like a bank or a company we go work for, or is sort of pulling the strings in ways we don't understand. I don't know what they're doing to make sure I still have electricity or working internet. I have no idea. But there's a hierarchy behind that, and I'm grateful. And you should be grateful as well.